Hello, dear friends. Ruslan Belov here, and this is your daily frontline breakdown, plus a brief look at the international agenda. Today is May 14th, 2026, a day that turned out to be packed, both in terms of what's happening along the line of contact and beyond it. All right, let's get into it. Massive strike, 800 drones and 50 missiles. We'll start with what dominated the last 24 hours. Russia carried out one of the most large-scale strikes on Ukrainian territory since the conflict began. In a single day, more than 800 Shahed-type drones were launched toward Ukrainian territory. The waves flew through the night, continued into the early morning, and never let up. Alongside that, more than 50 cruise and ballistic missiles. Going into detail on the actual damage is difficult, because the data is still coming in piecemeal and is incomplete on both sides. But the sheer scale of the strike signals that this is not simply a routine infrastructure attack. It happened against a backdrop of diplomatic activity around the conflict. And that's part of the calculus. Russia is demonstrating that military pressure does not ease, regardless of what's being discussed at the negotiating table. Peskov's statement: new conditions or a hardened position. Now for something that may have slipped past you amid all the news about the strikes. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov made a statement yesterday that, by the standards of diplomatic language, is fairly pointed and notably specific. According to him, even resuming talks with the Ukrainian side requires, as a precondition, that the AFU, Armed Forces of Ukraine, withdraw from Donbass and, pay attention here, Russian regions. At first glance, that might sound familiar, but the detail matters. It's 2026. AFU are no longer in either Kursk or Belgorod regions. They were pushed out last year, which means Russian regions in Peskov's formulation does not refer to those territories. He was referring to Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, those that Russia legally considers its own following the 2022 referendums, but which have never come fully under Russian control. In other words, the stated condition for a ceasefire and the start of negotiations is now not merely withdrawal from Donetsk region, but withdrawal from Zaporizhzhia and Kherson as well. This is a significant public hardening of Russia's position. It's understood that such statements can be tactical. Negotiations always begin with maximum demands. But let's note it clearly, this is Moscow's stated position as of today. Zaporizhzhia direction. Stepnohursk and recovering lost ground. Onto the front. The picture along the Zaporizhzhia direction is mixed. There are encouraging developments for the Russian side, but also problem areas that haven't resolved. Starting with the good news. Yesterday's episode ended with word that Russian forces had begun to slowly claw back April's losses, in particular pushing into Novoyakivlivka. But after the episode aired, a clarification came in that makes the picture slightly better. On Lukianivske, a number of sources had marked this settlement with an unclear status, no coloring indicating confirmed Russian control. That turned out to be inaccurate. Russian forces re-entered Lukianivske, consolidated, and the situation there can now be described as roughly 50-50. Fighting has not stopped, the settlement is divided, but positions are being recovered. Now Stepnohursk, and here the picture is different. AFU have genuinely pushed into the settlement and currently control roughly half of it, including the central section. But the cost has been enormous. Ukrainian forces are sustaining very heavy casualties. The Russian side is working intensively against assault groups, FPV drones, artillery, deliberate targeting of infantry. Multiple independent sources describe the situation in similar terms. Significant personnel losses, and any further push south of Stepnohursk is blocked by a high concentration of Russian FPV crews. In short, AFU are stuck at their current lines in Stepnohursk and paying a very steep price to hold them. One more thing worth noting separately. Some time ago I mentioned that on the Zaporizhzhia direction, Russian units had been given a specific priority: destroy enemy manpower first, equipment second. If it's a choice between hitting a vehicle or a soldier, you hit the soldier. This same directive has now apparently been extended to the center grouping. This is not coincidental. It represents a tactical shift across multiple directions simultaneously. Orikhiv direction, Verkhnia, Tersa and Voskresenske. On the Orikhiv sector, the situation is difficult, though not without movement. The main fighting is currently concentrated on the AFU defensive line in the area of two settlements, Voskresenske and Verkhnya Tersa. Russian forces have not yet broken through this line. The defense is holding despite constant pressure. However, reporting from Verkhnya Tersa indicates that nearly half the settlement is already under Russian control. If that holds in the coming days, logic suggests the breakthrough of the defensive line is a matter of weeks, not months. When it happens, the pace of movement westward will pick up again. For now, it's grinding, it's slow, but the direction hasn't changed. Majova direction, Novopidorodne entering its final stage. Now to a section that hasn't given much cause for positive news in a long time. The Majova direction in Dnipropetrovsk region, under the responsibility of the center grouping. For the first time in a while, there's actual movement to report. The focus is Novopidhorodne. Russian forces entered this village back on December 10th of last year, meaning more than 5 months of fighting have passed. It's understood this hasn't been a continuous assault. It's positional pressure with periodic active phases. But for a settlement of modest size, resistance has held for a very long time. Now the situation is entering its final stage. Centralna and Molodizhna streets have been cleared, and Russian forces have also swept through most of Sadova, Perezhna, and Vishnyova. AFU control within the settlement is now a minority. On further prospects, the next objectives are Kolona Majova and Raipole, but I wouldn't expect a swift advance here. The pace of the fighting for Novopidhorodne is a perfect illustration of how this stretch of the front operates: slow, limited forces, no sweeping maneuvers. If Raipole and Kolona Majova come under Russian control by the end of the summer campaign, that would already be a result. A push to Majova itself is more of an autumn story, or more likely winter. Kostiantynivka, street fighting and progress at Molocharka. On the Dobropilya direction, informational silence, Kostiantynivka. Footage from the western flank has come in, showing that fighting continues for Molocharka, and approximately half the settlement is now under Russian control. On the city itself, there's no confirmed footage yet, but direct reporting from a serviceman on the ground indicates that fighting is already underway in the area of residential blocks 81 and 92. That's urban combat well inside the city. Kostiantynivka continues to contract. On timelines, I won't speculate, it's a thankless exercise. But the overall trajectory is such that the city will most likely fall during the summer campaign. Everything is moving in that direction. Sloviansk direction. Russian forces at the outskirts of Orikhiv. Interesting news has come in from the Sloviansk direction. Backed by video material, footage has arrived from several locations around Orikhiv. The fact that it comes from multiple vantage points simultaneously suggests sustained activity along this section. The picture is as follows. Russian forces had previously advanced 1.5 kilometers toward the settlement. Today, new footage appeared showing a further 600-meter advance in the direction of Orikhiv. An infantry unit clearing AFU positions, active assault operations underway. Taking the data together, Russian forces have come right up to the outskirts of the settlement, and at the time of filming had possibly already consolidated on its perimeter. We'll wait for further confirmation before jumping ahead, watching the situation closely. North grouping, Kharkiv region and a breakthrough in Sumy region. Now, arguably the most important segment of today's episode, news from the North grouping. There are no map updates to show yet, but what's happening needs to be said, because it's genuinely significant. First, fighting has begun for Volkhivka in Kharkiv region. Russian forces have entered the village and street-level fighting is underway in the residential area. If Volkhivka falls, the neighboring settlement of Krychna will likely follow. This isn't a breakthrough or a game-changer, but movement is movement. Second, in the area of Veterinan, Russian forces have reached the outskirts of Hardened. Notably, they approached not from Russian territory, not straight across the border, but along the border line from the direction of Veterinan. That speaks to a methodical, deliberate advance. But let's not get carried away here. Even if Hardened is taken, then Shevchenkova, what comes next is Kozacha Lopan. a large, well-fortified settlement that can't be taken by storm, and certainly not by the forces that took Veteranana. Where the situation is genuinely worth close attention is Sumy region. The north grouping reports crossing the Seol River from the direction of Myropilya and taking Zaporizhzhia. That is serious. Let's map out the chain. Fighting is now ongoing in Zaporizhzhia. After that, the Seol needs to be crossed again, then comes Velika Rebetsia, a mid-sized settlement. And beyond that? Nothing. Not a single significant settlement between there and the outskirts of Sumy. I remain skeptical that the Russian side has any serious plans to take Sumy this year. Command priorities are clearly elsewhere. You can see that from where reserves are being redirected. But here's the question that keeps coming back. Why is the AFU defense on this axis caving as relatively easily as it is? Either the Ukrainian side concluded that no offensive was coming here and stripped forces away, or there's some other factor at play. That's an open question, and it demands watching. The trend over the last 2 months in Sumy region is one of the most remarkable dynamics on the entire front. Paying close attention. Geopolitics. The Iran war is making the rich richer, and it isn't the US. Now, briefly on the international agenda, which has direct bearing on the broader balance of forces. The Washington Post has run a piece whose central argument is simple and sharp. The US war with Iran is strengthening China and weakening Washington. This isn't an anti-American broadside, it's an assessment from analysts at the Center for a New American Security. CNAS expert Jacob Stokes puts it plainly. In geopolitical terms, this war has substantially improved Beijing's position. While Washington is burning through resources, missile defense stockpiles, and political capital with its allies, China is quietly filling the vacuum. It's selling weapons to Middle Eastern countries, including those nominally aligned with the United States. It's deepening its influence across the Gulf. It's using the energy crisis caused by the Strait of Hormuz disruptions as leverage. We're more stable, we're more reliable, we're not at war. And separately, a worrying signal for US allies in Asia. Washington is increasingly anxious about critical depletion of Patriot and THAAD missile stocks. Both Taiwan and Japan are now asking the question: can the United States actually hold multiple fronts simultaneously? The Middle East, Europe, and the Pacific? Right now, the answer to that question does not look encouraging for Washington. Trump and Abiy in Beijing. The summit, the whole world is watching. On May 14th, a 2-day summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping opened in Beijing, the first visit by an American president to China since 2017. Trump arrived with a full plane. The delegation included Secretary of State Rubio, Defense Secretary Hegseth, Trade Representative Greer, Treasury Secretary Bessent, close personal aides, and even family members. From the business world, Tim Cook, Elon Musk, Jensen Huang. At the opening ceremony, Trump told Xi that relations between the two countries would be better than ever. Xi, for his part, posed a philosophical question. Can two superpowers avoid the Thucydides trap, the historical pattern by which the collision of a rising and a dominant power ends in war? Elegantly framed. Xi named Taiwan the most important issue in bilateral relations and warned that if it is mishandled, it will push the relationship into a dangerous place. The formal agenda covers trade, technology, export controls, Taiwan, Iran, and artificial intelligence. But the overarching storyline hanging over everything is the Iran war. Trump wants Beijing to pressure Tehran and bring it back to the table. The problem is that Iran's controlled bleeding of American resources actually suits China. As long as the Strait of Hormuz remains contested, the United States loses more than anyone else. Analysts broadly agree that a comprehensive deal is not in the cards. At best, the summit will produce a framework agreement, a tariff pause, and some package of American goods purchases. But symbolically, this summit is an event of enormous consequence, and its outcomes deserve close attention. Robert Kagan in the Atlantic, checkmate in Iran. And the last item, perhaps the most telling, in terms of how the Western political class is processing what's happened. On May 10th, The Atlantic published a piece titled Checkmate in Iran. The author is Robert Kagan. For those unfamiliar, He is one of the principal ideologues of American interventionism over the past 3 decades, a co-founder of the Project for the New American Century, a man who was calling for the invasion of Iraq before September 11, 2001, the husband of Victoria Nuland, a name that should mean something to anyone who has followed the Ukraine conflict. In other words, this is not a pacifist, not a critic of American foreign policy. He is one of its chief architects. And this man writes the following in The Atlantic. The United States has suffered a total strategic defeat in Iran, a defeat that, unlike Vietnam or Afghanistan, can be neither repaired nor simply ignored. 37 days of airstrikes, Iran's military leadership decimated, its infrastructure devastated, and yet Iran did not capitulate. The Strait of Hormuz has effectively ceased to be an international waterway and become a strategic instrument of Tehran. American air defense stockpiles, Patriot, THAAD, have been run down to critical levels after just a few weeks of fighting against what Kagan himself calls a second-rank power. Allies in Taiwan and Japan are now questioning whether the American security guarantee is worth anything. Kagan honestly lays out what victory would actually require: a full-scale ground operation, occupation of Iran, willingness to lose warships in the strait, and then admits walking away now could seem like the least bad option. When a man of this stature and this track record writes something like that, it isn't just an article, it is an admission of systemic failure in American grand strategy across the Middle East, and it has direct relevance to what's unfolding on the Ukrainian front. Washington's resources, attention, and political will are now distributed across several crises at once, and Ukraine is clearly not first in that queue. That's all for today. Thank you for watching, it genuinely matters. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. See you in the next episode.